They whispered that she was a shadow, dull, plain, and utterly forgettable, a beige background character in the vibrant movie of high society. When Ethan Cole discarded his wife, Luna, like an out-of-season coat, he didn't just break her heart, he mocked her very existence. He replaced her with a woman who shone like a diamond, convinced he had finally upgraded to the life he deserved. But Ethan forgot one crucial rule of the elite. True power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits patiently in the dark. Tonight, at the city's most exclusive gala, the man who thought he knew everything is about to learn that his plain ex-wife isn't just a survivor. She is the empire he's been trying to impress all along. And she hasn't come for revenge. She's come for justice. The ink on the divorce papers was arguably the darkest thing in the room. It sat there, wet and final, a stark contrast to the aggressive beige and sterile chrome that defined the penthouse apartment Ethan Cole had so carefully curated. It was a space designed to impress, not to comfort. A showroom of success devoid of warmth, much like the marriage that was currently dissolving on the imported mahogany coffee table. Luna Vance sat on the edge of the designer sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. She wore a charcoal cardigan that was 2 sizes too big, swallowing her slender frame, and a long, nondescript skirt that brushed her ankles. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, with loose strands framing a face devoid of makeup. To the outside observer, and certainly to her husband, she looked like a smudge on a pristine canvas, an error to be corrected. "It's not just about us falling out of love, Luna," Ethan said, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. He didn't look at her. He was watching the London skyline, checking his reflection in the glass to ensure his tie was perfectly dimpled and his silhouette looked imposing against the city lights. "It's about trajectory, alignment." Luna remained silent. Her silence had always been her armor, a fortress she retreated into when the world became too loud, though Ethan mistook it for vacancy. She watched him, really looked at him, the sharp jawline she used to kiss, the ambitious eyes that once looked at her with affection, now cold and calculating. He turned, flashing that practiced, shark-like smile that had charmed venture capitalists and socialites alike. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look at me. Look at where I'm going. The merger with Rhodes Corp is happening next month. I need to be seen at the opera, at the galas, on the yachts in Monaco. I need a partner who can hold a room, who commands attention just by breathing, not one who hides in the corner reading paperback novels while I network." "I never stopped you from going to those things, Ethan," Luna said softly. Her voice was steady, lacking the hysteria I seemed to be bracing for. "I supported you. I edited your speeches. I waited up for you." "But you don't fit," he snapped, his mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal pure irritation. "God, look at you. You're just so plain. It's embarrassing, Luna. When I walk into a room, I want heads to turn. I want envy. With you, I get pity." They wonder why Ethan Cole, the rising star of fintech, is dragging around a librarian who looks like she shops at charity bins. He walked over to the table, opened a sleek checkbook, and scribbled furiously. He ripped the page out and slid it across the polished wood. "This is generous," he said, his tone shifting back to business casual, treating her like a redundant employee. "More than the prenup stipulated. Consider it a severance package for 3 years of whatever this was. Buy yourself some new clothes. Get a makeover, or don't. It doesn't matter anymore." Luna looked at the check. £50,000. To him, it was a go-away fee, a rounding error in his accounts. To the Luna he thought he knew, the orphan from the foster system, the quiet girl he'd met in a coffee shop before his career exploded, it was a fortune. It was supposed to be the thing that saved her. But Luna didn't reach for it. She looked up, her hazel eyes catching the late afternoon light. For a moment, there was something in them, a flash of steel, a depth of cold fire, a history of resilience that he had never bothered to read, that made Ethan pause. The air in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. But the moment passed, and she was just plain Luna again. "You're leaving me for her, aren't you?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Ethan sighed, feigning exhaustion, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Sienna isn't the reason. She's just a catalyst. She understands this world. She was born for it. She challenges me. She pushes me to be better, bigger. She's 22, Ethan, and she thinks equity is a horse-riding term. She is vibrant," Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the table, the crystal vase rattling. "She is alive. She is everything you refuse to be. Just sign the papers, Luna. Stop dragging this out. Go back to your books and your invisible life. Let me fly." Luna picked up the pen. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She signed her name, Luna Vance, with a precise, elegant hand, the loops of her signature looking almost regal. "Keep the check," she said, standing up. She looked taller than he remembered, her posture straightening as if a heavy weight had been lifted. "No, don't be a martyr," Ethan sneered, annoyed by her refusal to play the victim. "You have nothing. No family, no career, no connections. You'll be on the street in a month without this." "I have enough," she said enigmatically. She walked to the door, her movements graceful and silent. She paused with her hand on the brass handle. She didn't look back. "Goodbye, Ethan. I hope the altitude up there is worth the lack of oxygen." The door clicked shut with a soft finality that echoed louder than a slam. Ethan stared at the unsigned check, a flicker of unease settling in his gut. Why hadn't she cried? Why hadn't she begged? But then his phone buzzed, breaking the spell. It was a text from Sienna. "Wearing that red dress you bought me. Champagne is on ice. Hurry home, Tiger. XOXO." The unease vanished. He tore the check in half and dropped it in the bin. He was free. The dead weight was gone. He was finally ready to ascend to the godlike status he believed he was destined for. 2 years later. The air in the master suite smelled of expensive perfume, hairspray, and mounting desperation. Ethan Cole adjusted his tuxedo jacket, frowning at the mirror. The stress lines around his eyes had deepened over the last 24 months, carving canyons into his youthful face. The merger with Rhodes Corp had gone through, yes, but the market was volatile. His lifestyle, the penthouse, the Aston Martin, the trips to the Maldives, the private memberships, and, most significantly, Sienna, was burning through cash faster than he could generate it. He was a hamster on a wheel made of gold, running faster and faster, just to stay in the same place. "Does this look too sheer?" Sienna Rain emerged from the walk-in closet, spinning in a whirlwind of crimson silk. She was undeniably beautiful, blonde, statuesque, and possessing a laugh that could shatter glass. She was the trophy Ethan had wanted, the ornament that proved his success. She was a walking Instagram filter, but ornaments, he was learning, were heavy to carry. "It's fine," Ethan muttered, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "We need to leave in 10 minutes. The traffic to the Shard will be a nightmare, and we can't be late." "It's not just fine, Ethan," Sienna pouted, checking her makeup in the vanity mirror for the 10th time. "This is the Obsidian Gala. Everyone will be there. The board of directors, the investors, the Vancrofts." Ethan stiffened at the name. The Vancroft estate. For the last 6 months, rumors had swirled through London's financial district like a storm warning. The re-emergence of the Vancroft dynasty. A recluse billionaire family that owned half of the real estate in Europe and significant shares in practically every major tech firm, including Ethan's own company, was finally stepping back into the public eye. Specifically, the sole heiress was taking the reins. No one had seen her face. She was the ghost of the city, a phantom figure in boardrooms. But tonight, she was hosting the Obsidian Gala, a charity event with a buy-in of £10,000 a plate. Ethan needed this night. He needed it like a drowning man needed air. He needed to charm the Vancroft heiress. His company was leveraged to the hilt. If he could secure a partnership or even a public endorsement from the Vancroft estate, he would be bulletproof. If he failed, the house of cards he'd built on debt and arrogance might collapse, burying him alive. "Are you listening to me?" Sienna snapped, snapping a diamond bracelet onto her wrist. "I said, do you think she'll be there? The heiress." "That's the whole point of the night, Sienna," Ethan said, his patience fraying like an old rope. "And I need you to be perfect. No giggling at serious questions. No drinking too much champagne before the speeches. No selfies with the Prime Minister. I need to close a deal tonight." Sienna rolled her eyes, applying another layer of gloss. "You're always closing a deal. You used to be fun, Ethan. Now you're just sweaty and boring." The insult landed, but Ethan ignored it. He looked at Sienna and felt a hollow pang of regret. Not for Luna, never for Luna, he told himself aggressively, but for the peace he used to have. Sienna was a full-time job. She required constant validation, constant spending, constant attention. She was a black hole in a red dress. "Just play the part," Ethan said coldly. "We are the power couple. Act like it." He grabbed his phone and checked his bank balance surreptitiously. It was dangerously low. He had liquidated a significant portion of his portfolio to buy Sienna's necklace for tonight. A massive ruby pendant meant to catch the eye and signal prosperity. It was a gamble. Everything was a gamble now. "Let's go," he said, ushering her out. "And for God's sake, don't mention your Instagram follower count to the chairman of the bank." As the elevator descended, Ethan smoothed his lapels, taking deep, calming breaths. He convinced himself he was ready. He was Ethan Cole. He had shed the dead weight of his past. He was a king entering his court. He had no idea that the guillotine had already been sharpened, the basket was waiting, and the executioner was waiting at the top of the stairs. The ballroom at the Shard was a galaxy of artificial stars. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a prismatic glow over the cream of London society. The view of the Thames below was breathtaking, but no one was looking out the windows. The real view was inside. The air buzzed with the hum of string quartets and the murmur of deals being struck over caviar and truffle-infused canapes. Ethan walked in with Sienna on his arm, immediately scanning the room for targets. His eyes darted from face to face, calculating net worths and influence. "Wow," Sienna whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the opulence. "Look at the flowers. Those are black baccara roses. They cost a fortune. And look at that ice sculpture." "Focus," Ethan hissed through a frozen smile as he waved at a competitor across the room. "We are not tourists." They navigated the crowd, Ethan playing the role of the affable tycoon. He shook hands, laughed at jokes he didn't find funny, and deftly steered conversations toward his company's stock performance. But underneath the veneer, he was sweating. His palms were damp. He felt like an imposter in a room of old money. The whispers began almost immediately. They rippled through the crowd like a wave. They weren't about him. "Have you seen the hostess yet?" "I heard she arrived via private elevator. They say she bought the building just to host the party." "I heard she's formidable. Toured the Asian markets and ruthlessly cut the dead weight from the family portfolio. They say she's beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way." Ethan grabbed a glass of champagne, his knuckles white around the stem. He needed to find whoever was in charge. He spotted Damian Rhodes, the CEO of the company he'd merged with, standing near the orchestra. Damian looked relaxed, at ease. Everything Ethan wasn't. "Damian!" Ethan exclaimed, approaching him with forced joviality. "Wonderful turnout. Truly spectacular." Damian turned, his expression guarded, his eyes scanning Ethan with a critical coldness. "Ethan. Sienna. Yes, quite the spectacle. The Vancroft estate doesn't do things by halves." "Have you met her?" Ethan asked, cutting to the chase, desperate for intel. "The heiress?" Damian took a sip of his drink, eyeing Ethan with a strange mixture of pity and amusement. "I have. Briefly. She's impressive. Very sharp. She knows everything about everyone in this room, Ethan, including you." Ethan preened, straightening his tie. "Good. Then she knows my company is the future of the sector. She knows about our Q3 projections." "She knows your financials, Ethan," Damian said quietly, leaning in. "She knows about the liquidity issues. She knows about the bridge loan." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That's confidential. That's temporary. A market correction." "If you say so," Damian said, turning away, clearly disengaging from a sinking ship. "She's making her entrance in 5 minutes. Main staircase. I'd advise you to be respectful. She doesn't suffer fools, and she has a long memory." Ethan pulled Sienna toward the front of the crowd gathering at the base of the grand staircase. He needed to be seen. He needed to be first in line. He needed to make an impression. "My feet hurt," Sienna whined, shifting her weight. "Can we sit down? I need a drink." "Shut up," Ethan snapped, his eyes fixed on the top of the stairs. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, silencing the 1,000 guests. A hush fell over the room, heavy with anticipation. A single spotlight illuminated the top of the velvet-carpeted staircase. The music swelled, a dramatic, haunting cello piece that resonated in everyone's chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. "Please welcome your hostess, the chairwoman of the Vancroft Foundation, Ms. Luna Vancroft." Ethan frowned. Luna? Common name. A coincidence, just a cruel coincidence. And then she stepped into the light. The air left Ethan's lungs as if he'd been punched in the gut. The world tilted on its axis. The woman at the top of the stairs was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged a silhouette he didn't recognize. Curved, strong, regal. It flowed around her like liquid night. Diamonds glittered at her throat, real ones, vintage stones worth more than Ethan's entire existence. Her hair, once pulled back in messy buns, cascaded in sleek, dark waves around her shoulders. Her face was made up to perfection, highlighting high cheekbones and eyes that burned with intelligence and power. But it was the face. It was a face he had looked at across a breakfast table for 3 years. A face he had called plain. A face he had laughed at. A face he had discarded. It was Luna. Ethan blinked, sure he was hallucinating. He looked at Sienna, who was staring up with open-mouthed jealousy. He looked back at the woman. She began to descend the stairs. She didn't walk. She glided. Every step was a declaration of power. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was scanning it. She was the queen, and they were her subjects. And then her eyes locked onto his. There was no warmth, no fear, no lingering affection. There was only the cold, hard assessment of a predator spotting wounded prey. A small, imperceptible smile touched her lips. Not a smile of joy, but the smile of a judge delivering a verdict. "No," Ethan whispered, the glass slipping from his numb fingers and shattering on the floor. The sound was swallowed by the music, but the visual was stark. "It's impossible." "What?" Sienna asked, looking at the broken glass. "Ethan, what's wrong? You're pale." "That's my wife," he choked out, the words tasting like ash. Sienna looked at him, then up at the billionaire heiress descending the stairs like a goddess of vengeance. "That," Sienna whispered, horrifying realization dawning on her, "is the plain librarian?" Luna reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked straight toward them, the heavy velvet of her dress whispering against the floor. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough for Ethan to smell her scent. No longer the smell of old books and vanilla, but something expensive, complex, and dangerous. Oud and crushed roses. The room was silent. Everyone was watching. Luna tilted her head, her eyes boring into Ethan's soul, stripping him bare. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice smooth, dark chocolate wrapped in razor wire. "I believe you have my table, and I believe—" She glanced at Sienna, then back to him. "Wah! You're sitting in my seat." The silence that descended upon table 1, the most coveted spot in the room, was not peaceful. It was the suffocating vacuum before an explosion. Ethan stood frozen, the shattered flutes of champagne at his feet reflecting the fractured reality he was now living in. He felt naked, exposed under the glare of the chandeliers. Ethan started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, desperate to regain the composure that had been his trademark. "Luna, you look different. You look incredible." "And you look exactly the same, Ethan," Luna replied, her gaze sweeping over him with clinical indifference, noting the sweat on his brow, the fear in his eyes. Still chasing the brightest light in the room, terrified of the dark, still confusing price tags with value. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She didn't wait for him to move. She gestured to a security guard who gently but firmly guided a stunned Sienna out of the chair at the head of the table. "Hey," Sienna protested, her face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. "That's my seat. My name card is right there. Do you know who I am?" "Actually," Luna said, picking up the card embossed with Ms. Sienna Rain, "this was placed here as a courtesy to my ex-husband's +1. But since the hostess has arrived, seating arrangements have been optimized." She dropped the card into a waiter's passing tray as if it were a used napkin. Then she sat. She didn't just sit. She occupied the space with the gravity of a monarch reclaiming a throne. She adjusted her napkin, utterly unbothered by the scene she had just caused. Ethan was left standing. The eyes of London's elite, bankers, dukes, tech moguls, were glued to him. He could feel their judgment like a physical weight. He had discarded a Vancroft for a nobody. It was the worst business decision in the history of the city, and everyone knew it. He could practically hear the stock of his reputation plummeting in real time. "Ethan!" Damian Rhodes hissed, appearing at his elbow, grabbing him tight. "There's an empty spot at table 14, near the kitchen. Take it before you make more of a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." Ethan grabbed Sienna's arm, perhaps a little too roughly, and dragged her away from the epicenter of his humiliation. As they walked the long, shameful path to the back of the room, past the smirk of competitors and the whispers of socialites, he felt like he was walking to the gallows. Did he know? He couldn't have. Look at his face. He looks like he's seen a ghost. Imagine divorcing the Vancroft fortune for that. He traded a diamond for a piece of glass. They sat at table 14, wedged between a deaf retired colonel and a nervous intern who spilled water on the tablecloth. The view of the head table was obscured by a massive floral arrangement, but Ethan could see Luna clearly. She was laughing, a sound he hadn't heard in years, with the French ambassador. She looked radiant. She looked free. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sienna hissed, stabbing her fork into her salad as if it were Ethan's heart. "You said she was a mouse. You said she was nobody. You said she wore cardigans and read boring books." "I didn't know," Ethan snapped, keeping his voice low but venomous. "She never told me. We were married for 3 years, and she never mentioned that her grandmother was Isadora Vancroft. She lived like a pauper. She played you, Sienna sneered, taking a perverse pleasure in his pain. She watched you struggle to build your little company while she sat on a dragon's hoard. That's sick, Ethan. That's psychopathic. She tested you, and you failed. Ethan stared at Luna. Was it sick? Or was it a test he had spectacularly failed? He remembered the nights he'd come home exhausted, complaining about cash flow, about investors. Luna would listen, make him tea, and rub his shoulders. She had offered to help with the books once, and he had laughed at her. Stick to your novels, Lou. Finance is for the big boys. God, she could have bought his company with her pocket change. She could have bought him. He watched as Luna stood up to give the keynote speech. The room fell silent instantly. For years, Luna began, her voice amplified and crystal clear, commanding the cavernous room effortlessly. The Vancroft estate is operated in the shadows. My grandmother believed that wealth should be quiet, that influence should be subtle, but silence allows weeds to grow. Her eyes flicked briefly, devastatingly, toward the back of the room, toward table 14. It allows arrogance to mistake itself for competence. It allows mediocrity to masquerade as excellence. Tonight, we step into the light, and we will be evaluating our partnerships very aggressively. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The merger, the loans, everything relied on the goodwill of the market. And the market just found a new queen. She wasn't just back. She was cleaning house. 2 hours later, the gala was winding down, but the air was still electric with gossip. Ethan had spent the evening trying to corner investors, but they scattered like roaches whenever he approached. He was radioactive. No one wanted to be seen talking to the man who divorced Luna Vancroft. He found Luna on the terrace. It was a private area guarded by security. But the head of security recognized Ethan and with a pitying look, let him pass. Luna was standing by the railing, looking out over the Thames. The wind whipped her dark hair around her face, making her look wild and untamed, the opposite of the domestic creature he had divorced. She held a glass of red wine, looking like a deity contemplating the destruction of a city. Why? Ethan asked. His voice was raw. He didn't have the energy for charm anymore. Just tell me why. Luna didn't turn around. You'll have to be more specific, Ethan. Why am I rich? Why am I here? Or why didn't I tell you? Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, walking closer. We were married. We shared a bed. We shared a life. You let me worry about mortgage payments when you could have bought the whole damn block. Did you get off on it? Watching me sweat? Was I just entertainment for you? Luna finally turned. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes dark pools reflecting the city lights. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be sure, she said softly. I grew up surrounded by people who wanted things from me. My name, my money, my influence. Everyone wanted a piece of Vancroft. When I met you in that coffee shop, you didn't know who I was. You liked me. You laughed at my jokes. You liked my mind. Or so I thought. I did like you, Ethan insisted, stepping closer. I loved you. We were happy in the beginning. You loved the idea of having someone safe, Luna corrected, her voice hardening. Someone who wouldn't challenge you. Someone plain. Who would look at you like you were the sun. But the moment you got a taste of real success, you didn't want a partner. You wanted a prop. And I wasn't shiny enough. I wasn't an accessory you could wear on your arm to impress the board. I was building a future for us. I did it all for us. No, Ethan, you were building a shrine to yourself. And you sacrificed me on the altar of your ego. She took a step closer, the scent of oud and roses enveloping him, intoxicating and terrifying. If I had told you about the money, you never would have left. You would have stayed, and you would have bled me dry. You would have used my inheritance to fund your vanity projects, your cars, your mistresses. You would have cheated on me in secret instead of leaving me in the open. I saved myself the indignity of being your bank account." Ethan flinched. The truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. He knew, deep down, she was right. If he had known she was a Vancroft, he would have treated her like royalty, not out of love, but out of greed. "I can fix this," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. He reached for her hand, his eyes pleading. "Luna, look at us. We have history. I made a mistake. A massive, terrible mistake. But I'm still the man you married. Let me prove it. Let's start over. You and me. Think of what we could do together now. We could rule this city." Luna looked at his hand, then up at his face. For a second, Ethan saw a flicker of the old Luna, the softness, the vulnerability. Hope flared in his chest. Then she laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Oh, Ethan, you really don't get it. You think this is a negotiation. You think I'm still the girl waiting for you to come home and validate her existence. You think you can charm your way out of an execution." She pulled her hand away as if he were contagious. "I didn't come here to win you back," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "I came here to show you exactly what you threw away. You called me plain. You called me a smudge. Well, Ethan, I hope you enjoy the view from the gutter, because I'm about to buy the pavement you're standing on." "Is that a threat?" Ethan bristled, his fear turning to anger. "No," Luna said, turning back to the skyline. "It's a forecast. It's going to rain, Ethan, and you don't have an umbrella. The hangover the next morning wasn't from alcohol. It was from the adrenaline crash of total social collapse." Ethan sat in his office, the silence of the room deafening. Usually, by 9:08 a.m., his phone would be buzzing with calls from suppliers, partners, and his PR team. Today, it was silent, the silence of a tomb, except for one notification, a news alert on his tablet. Vancroft Estate announces audit of fintech sector. "Weeding out the weak," says heiress. Ethan clicked the link with trembling fingers. There was a photo of Luna from last night, looking regal and terrifying. The article detailed her plan to reevaluate the Vancroft holdings in the tech sector, specifically targeting companies with inflated valuations and unstable leadership. It was a declaration of war. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Cole?" It was his secretary, Sarah. Her voice sounded shaky, on the verge of tears. "Mr. Rhodes is on line 1. He sounds upset." Ethan picked up the phone. "Damien, listen about last night." "Shut up, Ethan," Damien cut him off. There was no warmth in his voice anymore. "I just got off the phone with the Vancroft legal team. They're calling in the bridge loan." "They can't do that." Ethan stood up, knocking his chair over. "That loan has a 5-year maturity. We have terms." "Read the fine print, you idiot. There's a clause about reputational risk to the lender. Apparently, your public meltdown last night qualifies. They want the $10 million back. By Friday." "I don't have $10 million liquid," Ethan shouted, pacing the room. "You know that. We put it all into the expansion. It's tied up in assets." "Then you're insolvent," Damien said coldly. "And since our merger was contingent on your solvency, the deal is off. My lawyers will be sending over the termination papers within the hour." "Damien, please, you can't do this. We're friends. We played golf last week." "We were associates, Ethan, and right now, you're toxic. Luna Vancroft has blacklisted you. If I stick with you, she comes after me next. Goodbye." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the receiver. In the span of 12 hours, he had gone from a rising star to a pariah. The office door opened. He expected Sarah, but it was Sienna. She was wearing sunglasses, even though it was overcast. She didn't look at him. She walked straight to the bar cart in the corner and poured herself a vodka tonic, downing half of it in one gulp. "We need to talk," she said. "Not now, Sienna." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Rhodes just pulled the merger. I have to find £10 million in 3 days or I lose the company." "Yeah, about that." Sienna took a sip, grimacing. "I'm moving out." Ethan looked up, blinking. "What?" "I'm moving out," she repeated, turning to face him. She took off her sunglasses to reveal eyes that were puffy from crying, or perhaps from calculating. This isn't what I signed up for, Ethan. The humiliation last night? People were laughing at me. I lost 3,000 followers overnight." "I was the one they were laughing at," Ethan yelled. "I'm the one losing everything. My company, my reputation." "Exactly," Sienna shrugged. "You're losing. And I don't do losers. I stuck with you because you were going places. Now, you're going to bankruptcy court. I can't have that attached to my brand." "Your brand?" Ethan let out a hysterical laugh. "You're an influencer with 50,000 followers. I paid for your followers. I paid for your apartment. I paid for the nose job you lied about having." "And now the checks are going to bounce," Sienna said, grabbing her purse. "I've already called a mover. Don't worry, I'm only taking the things you bought me. Which is, well, everything. The clothes, the jewelry, the bags. You're leaving me now?" Ethan walked around the desk, his hands shaking. "When I'm down, I left my wife for you, Sienna." "And she turned out to be a billionaire," Sienna said, opening the door. She looked back at him, her expression not one of malice, but of simple, brutal pragmatism. "You bet on the wrong horse, Ethan. Don't be mad at me for knowing when to leave the race." She slammed the door. Ethan stood in the center of his glass-walled office, the empire he had built on image and arrogance crumbling around him. He looked out the window at the London skyline. Somewhere out there, in a boardroom likely made of real mahogany rather than veneer, Luna was sitting. She hadn't just divorced him. She hadn't just humiliated him. She was erasing him. He grabbed a paperweight, a heavy chrome sphere he'd bought to look important, and hurled it at the window. It bounced off the reinforced glass with a pathetic thud and rolled under the sofa. He sank to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. For the first time in years, he thought about the small, cozy apartment he and Luna had shared when they were first married. The smell of her cheap vanilla candles, the way she used to hum when she read, the safety. He had traded a diamond for a rhinestone because the rhinestone sparkled more under the cheap lights of the club. And now he was left with nothing but dust. The end of Ethan Cole's empire didn't happen with a bang, but with the quiet, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard in a sterile legal office. It had been 1 week since the Obsidian Gala. In that time, Ethan had lost his financing, his merger partner, and his mistress. Now, he was sitting across from a team of liquidators, watching them dissect his life into recoverable assets. "The penthouse is already listed," the lead attorney, a dry man named Mr. Henderson, who smelled of stale coffee, said without looking up. "The Aston Martin has been repossessed by the leasing agency. We are currently evaluating the office furniture." "It's a Herman Miller chair," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "It cost £2,000. "We'll be lucky to get 400 for it at auction," Henderson replied, scribbling on a notepad. "The market is flooded with distressed office assets right now. Everyone is downsizing." Ethan slumped in his seat. He wore a suit that hadn't been dry cleaned in days. The sharp, polished tycoon of last week was gone. In his place sat a man who looked like he was shrinking inside his own clothes. His stubble was graying, his eyes bloodshot. "There must be something else," Ethan pleaded. "My intellectual property? The algorithm? The client list?" "Worthless without the capital to operate it," Henderson said. "The client list has evaporated. However, there is one offer for the complete acquisition of Cole FinTech's remaining assets." Ethan perked up. "An offer? From whom? How much?" Henderson slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. The offer is for £1. It covers your outstanding debts to the creditors, preventing you from filing for personal bankruptcy. You walk away with nothing, but your name remains legally solvent. £1? Ethan choked out. Who is the buyer? A holding company called Veritas LLC. Ethan stared at the name. Veritas. Truth. He knew exactly who was behind it. It wasn't just a business acquisition. It was a message. She was buying his life's work for the price of a chocolate bar. Not because she wanted it, but because she could. She was clearing the board. She was taking the last thing he had. Take it, Ethan whispered, signing the paper. The stroke of the pen felt heavy, final. As he walked out of the office and onto the gray London street, his phone buzzed. It wasn't a business call. It was a notification from a tabloid app. Exclusive. The Rise and Fall of Ethan Cole by Sienna Rain. Ethan froze. He opened the article. There, in vivid, sensational detail, was everything. Sienna had sold him out. She described his vanity, his obsession with status, his mockery of his plain ex-wife. She painted herself as a naive victim of his manipulation and him as a sociopathic climber who discarded people like tissues. She included screenshots of his texts. He stood on the street corner, people bustling past him. Some glanced at him, a flicker of recognition in their eyes, followed by a sneer. He wasn't just broke. He was a national joke. He walked to the nearest trash can and dropped his phone inside. He didn't want to read the comments. He turned up his collar against the drizzle and began the long walk to the only place he had left. A small, damp studio apartment in Zone 4 that he had rented under his mother's maiden name. The climb to the top had taken him 10 years. The fall had taken 10 days. The Vancroft Estate Library was a cathedral of silence. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held centuries of knowledge, and a fire crackled in the oversized hearth. It was the kind of room Ethan would have killed to own. A room that smelled of history and power. Luna sat in a leather armchair, a cup of tea cooling on the side table. In her lap was the acquisition contract for Cole Fintech. Price, Ors. She should have felt triumphant. This was the moment the Count of Monte Cristo lived for. She had crushed the man who broke her. She had stripped him of his pride, his wealth, and his status. She had won. But as she stared at the signature, Ethan Cole, shaky and uneven, she didn't feel joy. She felt tired. Is it done? Luna looked up. Her grandmother's old lawyer, Arthur, stood in the doorway. He was the only one who had known about her marriage, the only one who had warned her against keeping her identity a secret. It's done, Luna said quietly. He signed. He's out. And the ex-mistress? Paid for her story, Luna said, a hint of distaste in her voice. Sienna Rain is currently trending on Twitter. She thinks she's won, but she's just exposed herself as a mercenary. Society will eat her alive in 6 months. She'll be a footnote in a cautionary tale. Arthur walked over and sat opposite her. You don't look like a victor, Luna. I thought I would feel lighter, she admitted. I thought watching him lose everything would validate me. It would prove that I was the prize he missed. But looking at this, she tapped the paper, it just looks like tragedy. He was so desperate to be someone, Arthur, and I fed that desperation. I hid who I was because I wanted to be loved for me, but in doing so, I let him believe he was better than me. I set the trap. He walked into it willingly, Arthur reminded her gently. He chose cruelty. He chose betrayal. You didn't force him to leave you. You didn't force him to humiliate you. I know, Luna sighed, standing up and walking to the window. The vast grounds of the estate stretched out before her, manicured and perfect. But destroying him doesn't fix what broke in me. I'm still the girl who wasn't enough. You are Luna Vancroft, Arthur said firmly. You are enough for 1,000 lifetimes. The question is, what will you do now? You've cleared the weeds, as you said. What will you plant? Luna looked at her reflection in the glass. She saw the designer clothes, the perfect hair, the jewelry. It was armor, just like Ethan's beige penthouse was armor. I'm done destroying things, she said, turning back to Arthur. Liquidate Coal FinTech. Sell off the assets and donate the proceeds to the literacy fund. I don't want his company. I don't want his ghost haunting my ledger. And Ethan? Arthur asked. Do we pursue him for the remaining legal fees? Luna looked at the fire. She remembered a night years ago when Ethan had come home with a cheap bouquet of carnations because he'd remembered she had a bad day. It was a rare moment of kindness in a sea of ambition. No, she said softly. Let him go. He has his punishment. He has to live with himself. 1 year later. The bell above the door of the Dusty Spine bookstore chimed softly. It was a Tuesday afternoon, usually a slow time, which suited the manager just fine. He was in the back, unpacking a box of new releases. He wore a beige apron over a flannel shirt, his sleeves rolled up. His hands, once manicured and soft, were rougher now, stained with ink and dust. Ethan? The owner, Mrs. Higgins, called out. Customer asking for the new historical fiction section. Coming, Ethan called back. He walked onto the floor, wiping his hands on a rag. He had aged in the last year. His hair was graying at the temples, and the shark-like hunger in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, resigned stillness. He lived in a small flat above the shop. He took the bus. He read books. He was, for the first time in his life, a nobody. And to his utter shock, he slept better than he ever had in the penthouse. There were no margins to meet, no investors to impress, just stories. He pointed the customer to the correct aisle and began to tidy a display table near the front window. Outside, the London rain was falling in sheets, washing the city gray. A black town car pulled up to the curb. Ethan stiffened. He knew that car. He had coveted a car like that once. The back door opened, and an umbrella was snapped open. A woman stepped out. It was her. Luna didn't come into the shop. She stood on the sidewalk, looking at the window display. She was wearing a trench coat, simple and elegant. She looked happy. Not the manic, high-powered happiness of the gala, but a deep, settled content. She was looking at the book in the window, a debut novel titled The Glass Ceiling, written by an anonymous author. Ethan held his breath. He was standing just behind the glass. If she looked up, she would see him. He wanted to run. He wanted to hide in the back room. The shame was still there, a dull ache in his chest. But he didn't move. He stood his ground. He owed her that much. Luna looked up. Her eyes met his through the rain-streaked glass. Time seemed to suspend. Ethan waited for the look of triumph, the sneer, the pity. He waited for her to point and laugh, to come in and buy the store just to fire him. But she didn't. Her expression was soft. There was no anger left. She looked at him, really looked at him, and gave a barely perceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was acknowledgement. I see you. You survived. I survived. Then she turned and got back into the car. The engine purred, and the vehicle slipped away into the traffic, disappearing into the gray city. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked down at the book in his hands. It was a classic he had refused to read when they were married, calling it boring sentimental trash. He opened it to the first page. Ethan? Mrs. Higgins asked from the counter. You okay, love? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ethan looked out at the empty street where the heiress had been. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that didn't reach his eyes but settled comfortably in his heart. No, Mrs. Higgins, he said quietly. Not a ghost. Just an old acquaintance." He closed the book and placed it gently on the shelf. "I'm going to take my break now," he said. "I think I'm going to read for a while." He walked to the back of the shop, the smell of old paper and vanilla candles surrounding him. It wasn't a billion-dollar empire. It wasn't a penthouse in the sky. It was small and plain and quiet. But for the first time in his life, it was enough. The story of Ethan and Luna isn't just about money or revenge. It's a mirror held up to the lies we tell ourselves about worth. Ethan chased a reflection of power, destroying the only real thing he had, only to find that the gold he sought was just painted lead. Luna, forced to reclaim her voice, learned that true power isn't about how loudly you roar, but how firmly you stand in your own truth. In the end, they both found exactly what they deserved. Luna found her crown, and Ethan found his humanity. Sometimes, you have to lose the whole world to find your own soul. What a journey! If this story hit you right in the feels, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What do you think? Did Ethan deserve a second chance, or did he get off too easy? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about betrayal, karma, and sweet revenge, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.